Even less cooperative than the public were the UFOs themselves. Once again, they seemed determined to refute all suggestions that they didn't exist. In 1952, the U.S. was hit by a massive wave of UFO sightings, more than 1,500 separate incidents in all, and many more occurred that weren't reported. Those who question why UFOs haven't landed in Washington, D.C. may be interested in what may rank as the most dramatic UFO incident of all. In July 1952, the nation's capital was buzzed by at least 6 UFOs on 2 consecutive weekends. The objects were picked up on numerous civilian and military radars. Fighters were scrambled but were unable to get near the elusive lights. Photos were taken of the objects. Confidential reports hinted the objects may have been from other planets, but the public explanation was the sightings were merely the result of a temperature inversion, a thin excuse which didn't convince many people, especially the Pentagon's own radar operators. Even more embarrassing for the Air Force, the D.C. incidents occurred at the same time as a major Pentagon news conference, called in order to formally dismiss UFOs.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations.
With its public credibility on the wane, the Air Force launched yet another so-called study, Project Blue Book, which was soon inundated with new sighting reports. The first head of Blue Book, Captain Edward Rappelt, somewhat naively attempted to conduct an authentic study, but quickly surmised that his superiors didn't really welcome such an effort. In disgust, he quit, then wrote a book, which told the world that a cover-up was in the works, that UFOs were real, and that they may be extraterrestrial craft. Blue Book stumbled on.
From the Air Force point of view and the government point of view, it was primarily a public relations exercise. To the Air Force in those days, UFO reports were just an annoyance. They were, and I asked Hector Quintanilla, Major Quintanilla, who was in charge of Blue Book at the time, and he said, it's not our job to do research, it's the scientific community's job. And every time we go to the scientific community, they say there is nothing to UFOs. So who are we to say that the scientists are wrong?
Despite the pretense of being an objective study, it became abundantly clear in later years that Blue Book was a public relations exercise, and that the best, most intriguing UFO cases were never included in Blue Book's files. This memo, issued by an Air Force general in 1969, confirms that UFO cases which affected national security were sent to another program, one that remains secret to this day.
So the notion, which most people seem to accept, that the only group concerned with UFOs was this wonderful scientific group, Project Blue Book, which it never was anyway, is nonsense as clearly enunciated by an Air Force general told to look over the whole situation.
Former Air Force Colonel Wendell Stevens was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Base when the UFO studies were headquartered there. He was assigned to a special project in Alaska, along with a team of civilians and several planes packed with sophisticated electronic and photographic equipment.
And we succeeded in getting collecting information probably 2 or 3 times a week. And some of the cases, of the contact cases, were quite spectacular. One of the key pictures that I remember was a time when a disc, about a 30-foot diameter disc, got in the slot behind the trailing edge of the big wing and ahead of the leading edge of the small wing, and only inside of the wingtips, within 50 or 60 feet of the fuselage, and sat there for 2 or 3 minutes. And they took pictures with all these cameras, and we would package it in a metal box, a little locker that was locked and chained to an officer's wrist and flown to Washington. Every night we got one of those. None of that has ever been released.
Up next, journalist Brian Gresh investigates the central event in what some have called the Cosmic Watergate.
The town of Roswell, New Mexico isn't much different today than it was 45 years ago, when it became the unlikely setting for what may rank as the greatest cover-up in history. The old Army airfield has been closed for years, but back in the late 40s, it was home to the world's only atomic bomber wing, the 509th, a point of pride with the locals. Today, as then, much of New Mexico is a virtual military fiefdom. Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque was and is the state's largest employer. Los Alamos Lab and White Sands Missile Base are still key players in the nation's defense establishment. If someone had wanted to get a clear picture of America's military capabilities back in the 40s, New Mexico would have been the place to be. New Mexico in the late 40s and early 50s was not only a hotbed of military activity, but also of UFO sightings. Green fireballs and other unexplained phenomena had been reported over nearly all of the state's top-secret military facilities on an ongoing basis, prompting hush-hush studies and evaluations. One secret study, dubbed Project Twinkle, concluded that it was doubtful the phenomenon was of natural origin. One reason? When attempts were made to photograph or record the fireballs, they simply moved to another location, as if they didn't want their pictures taken. Twinkle remained classified for decades. By early July of '47, the public was also becoming aware of the flying saucer mystery. Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting had occurred only a few days before, spurring a nationwide sighting spree. But what was seen in the skies over Roswell was different from the other elusive lights. This time, the lights came crashing down. A rancher named Mac Brazel was the first to spot the wreckage in the desert. He first phoned the sheriff, who then called the Army Air Base to report that something had crashed, a decision both would soon regret. The base dispatched intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel to the scene. Marcel and others gathered up some of the strange material and brought it back to Roswell.
Foil-looking material, about the thickness or thinner than the foil on a package of cigarettes, and that's pretty darn thin. Could not be burned, could not be cut with a pair of scissors, put on the ground and a pen knife taken and tried to drive it through, wouldn't work. There was no way, it was indestructible for all practical purposes.
Lieutenant Walter Hott was the public affairs officer for Roswell at the time the strange metal was found. He recalls being ordered by base commander Colonel William Blanchard to issue a shocking press release.
He called and said words to this effect: "We've got pieces of what we think is a flying saucer."
The release was picked up by newspapers all over the world, and queries about the flying saucer came pouring in.
The first phone call I got after that got on the wires and the like was from London, England, fellow calling some newspaper, and I don't remember which one it was. "If this is something from outer space, how did Major Marcel know how to fly it?" I said, well, he didn't actually get in it and fly it. He just put the pieces in an aeroplane and flew the aeroplane.
But within hours after the initial press release, higher-ups within the Army ordered a new story to be issued. The wreckage wasn't from a flying saucer after all, but rather was part of a weather balloon. A news conference was staged, at which pieces of a shredded weather balloon were put on display. But Major Marcel admitted in later years that the material shown to the reporters wasn't what he brought back from the Brazel Ranch. Marcel said the metal had been spread out over 3/4 of a mile at the ranch, far too much material for a weather balloon. And he said some of the pieces contained strange, inscrutable symbols, as if written in an alien language.
He reiterated that over and over, that what he had seen was not, I'll have to quote here, not of this earth. He was very, very adamant about it.